Today we start the final section in chapter 22, the excretory system. And what we've talked about already in this chapter is there are various organs that remove body wastes. We know, for instance, that when we sweat, our sweat glands will excrete salts, urea, and other waste products. Its main job, is to regulate our body temperature. Our lungs excrete water and carbon dioxide when we breathe. Our liver produces bile that contains the pigments from broken down erythrocytes. Remember, if they're damaged, they are taken to the liver where they're broken down into the raw materials. So sometimes this is one of the things that the liver produces. And the kidneys and associated structures compose the primary excretory system of the human body. There are other things that excrete, but this is the primary part of the human body, and they're vitally important in regulating the blood's chemistry. And so the major organs that make up this are going to be obviously the kidneys. They're structures that are shown right there. And then they filter the blood, and then the urine will pass down the ureters. One leads from each kidney down to the bladder, where the urine is stored. And then the urethra is the single opening that empties the bladder to the outside of your body. Now the kidneys kind of resemble a large purplish brown bean, and its main job is to filter metabolic waste from the blood. In other words, remember, the blood has circulated throughout the body and has gone by all the cells, and any of their waste the blood picks up, and it's taken to the kidneys to be filtered. Now here are some structures of the kidney, just to kind of the different parts of that bean shaped. We have the renal cortex is a section around the outside edge, and then we have what's called the renal medulla, and then we also have a part of it looks like they're in the shape of pyramids, so they refer to those often as pyramids. And then the inner part of the kidney is called the renal pelvis. Now, the nephrons are just microscopic tubules that, and your kidney has just millions of these microscopic tubules, and they're called nephrons. You may recall the beginning of this word from nephridia, and different structures that started with those same letters that we have talked about. Different organisms have their way of filtering, and so this is still our way. These little microscopic tubules make up the nephrons, and they're held together by a thin layer of connective tissue, and they contain blood vessels and nerves and lymph vessels. And so the nephron is actually like the functional unit of the kidney, like the nephridia was the functional unit for filtering out the waste in the smaller organisms that we. So if we take this part right there, which was the renal cortex, and we magnify it, and then that outer portion is the renal cortex, and that is the renal medulla. Okay, so those are the two parts there. Now, well, let's look a little bit more closely at the top part. That top part right there is the nephron. And if we magnify that a little bit more, we can see the parts that make up the nephron. So it's a quite complex little structure. We have arteries and are not very tiny arterioles probably, and venules, the blue ones, and then we have capillaries that are connecting. So the structure of the nephron, we have the glomerulus. This is a collection of blood capillaries that we'll be able to maybe see in a diagram here in the next slide. And then there's also something called a Bowman's capsule. The capsule fits around the glomerulus, so this is where the blood plasma is going to be absorbed into this Bowman's capsule. So here's that same diagram that we had in the previous one. The glomerulus is like a tiny ball of thread on the end of those red blood vessels there. It's a bunch of capillaries in there. And then around the outside is like a cup that fits around it called the Bowman's capsule. So you have the glomerulus and then Bowman's capsule that fits around the outside of it. And the blood plasma goes into that Bowman's capsule. Now, the water, glucose, amino acids are forced, it says, out of the blood and into the Bowman's capsule. So it's going to move from the glomerulus to the capsule. And then the urine that's collected, as they go down these yellow tubes that they have going all the way down to the bottom and then circulating back up. This is where a lot of that gets reabsorbed that doesn't need to go out in the urine. So if everything's functioning properly, if there's too much moves out, it will reabsorb the part that you need to keep. And when everything that has been reabsorbed has happened already, then the remains of it will collect in that collecting duct right there that empties one of these nephrons, and in that tube is where you'll find the urine. So what is urine? Well, urine is collected in the renal pelvis of the kidney, we said, and then it exits the body through the ureters, and then exits the, probably the better way to say that would be that it exits the kidneys through the ureters, empties into the bladder where it's stored until you need to eliminate that, and then ultimately it exits the body through the urethra. Now, urine is about 95% water, and then the rest of it is being solids in there. And in these solids, or that we find in there, we have urea, which is formed from protein catabolism. In other words, when protein breaks down, remember we had anabolism is the building of proteins, catabolism is the breaking down of that. So it's usually the most common organic substance that's in urine is urea. Now, uric acid, which forms during nucleic acid breakdown, is also found in urine. Then creatinine is another substance. This is produced during muscular contraction. When muscles contract, it produces this, and it's also filtered out in the kidneys. So each of these is kind of produced by a different thing. Urea by protein breakdown, uric acid by nucleic acid breakdown, and then creatinine by muscular contractions. Now, what we do sometimes when we're trying to determine the health of an individual or what might be causing problems, they will often perform a test that's called urinalysis. And in urinalysis, the test detects and measures the compounds that are found in a urine sample. They know what should be there, what's normal for an individual. And if you're drinking enough fluid, like 6 to 8 glasses per day, that goes a long way toward maintaining healthy kidneys. So drinking a lot of fluid is a good thing. We know that it also is very helpful in many other ways of drinking plenty of fluids. Because remember, the water is needed for cooling you. It also helps more liquid going through the kidneys, so more of it is filtered out. Now, here are the components of urine. This is what you would expect to find in there. So in other words, if you were healthy and you gave a urine sample, they would analyze it, and here's kind of what you would expect to find in normal urine. Obviously, mostly water, but then there you can see the urea, the second one down from the top. We also said there was creatine. Uric acid is about 2/3, 3/4 of the way down, and there's other things that you can find in it. So this is what we would normally expect, and if the amounts that we find in there fall in the ranges that we have here, then probably your urinary system, particularly your kidneys, are probably functioning normally. If we sample the urine and we find things in it that shouldn't be there, those can be indicators of things that might be going on in your body that are causing you to not feel well. If we find glucose in the urine, that could be an indication that you have diabetes. Another one, the third one down, there's acetone, is also could be found in there if you had diabetes. But acetone could also be because you're maybe starving or something like that. Proteins shouldn't be there shouldn't be much in there, but that could be indications of possibly kidney failure or kidney disease, or even heart disease. Erythrocytes, remember, that's part of the blood, and that could be an indication of a urinary infection. Leukocytes in there, remember, leukocytes fight off disease. Could be that because you have like a urinary infection, or a bladder infection or something like that. And then they have some other things listed there that could be also found in there. And then uric acid is, if you find that in your urine, and it can build up in certain parts of your body, and it's extremely painful if you have gout. So, but drinking plenty of fluids goes a long way toward minimizing that. So that takes us to the end of our chapter on internal transport.